Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us again for another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. A huge thank you and special shout out to the Vitech Imaging Solutions Group for bringing us another event with the one and only man, the myth, the legend, Tony Gale, who today is going to be talking about getting started with video, even in your backyard. Tony, you're regular here. You know what to do. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Hi, everybody. I am Tony Gale, and this is Getting Started with Video, even in your backyard. Thank you to the B&H Event Space and to Manfrotto, Joe B, Plastilite, Low Pro, and Syrup, all part of the Vitech Imaging Solutions Group. In addition to being a Manfrotto ambassador, I'm also a Sony Artisan of Imagery, an X-Rite Colorati, and the APA National President. I am, as anybody who has seen me speak before knows, a commercial photographer based in New York. I shoot a bunch of stuff for different clients, editorial, corporate, advertising, both stills and video. And video can be a lot of different things, even like that little slideshow. So for getting started with video, roughly, we're going to have these different categories. Why shoot video? What's A-roll? What's B-roll? Camera settings? What translates from still photography to video? Getting started. And then a very short, little tiny snippet on editing. So as we start, just a few pieces of gear that you might want to think about if you're starting with video. Obviously, the most important thing if you're going to create video is you need a device to capture video on, so a camera or your phone. But you're going to want something to carry stuff around. So last time I talked about the backpack I like when I'm like hiking and traveling. This is a backpack I like for video because the Flipside 300, it's decent size, but it's not huge. I can fit a couple of cameras. I can fit some various things in there and get around and go pretty quickly. A video head on a tripod is important. The B-Free 3-way advanced is good, and I'll get into more detail as to why that matters. You may, if you're going to capture video with your phone, you're going to need a way to put your phone on your tripod. You know, you're going to put your phone on something. So I like the Joby Grip Tight smartphone mount because it can rotate to vertical or horizontal. If you are going to be capturing video with a regular camera, like my Sony's, and you want to do vertical video, you might want an L bracket. You know, vertical video like that is not easy to do with a tripod head, a normal tripod or a video head without the L bracket. And then you might consider a gimbal. I'll be talking about gimbals as well, and I'll be explaining all of this in a little bit. Gimbal just helps you get steady handheld shots, maybe a GorillaPod. The advantage of something like a GorillaPod is it gives you, aside from being like a mini tripod, it also gives you a way to have a handle when you're capturing video. Trying to hand hold like this is hard to keep steady, especially if you're moving. With something like a GorillaPod where you can just make it a little handle, it's easier. All right. And now we're going to jump into it. So why shoot video? I think probably the most important reason for anything creative is because it's fun. Creating video is fun.
Whoa, whoa, whoa,
It's this is a little loud. Hold on. This is a slideshow I made for a show I had where I combined video and stills because video can be both of those things. It's just a sequence of things put together one after another. Slideshow is video, video is video, time-lapse is video. There's a lot of different ways to do it, and it's just fun. So I think that's the most important reason. If you want to shoot professionally, or if you do shoot professionally, behind the scenes is something that a lot of clients want. They want to know, oh, here's what it's like on a set. Here's all this stuff. You can use that for self-promotion. There's a photographer named Monty Isom, super nice guy, really good photographer, who does a lot of behind the scenes videos as self-promotion. So you can see this. Sorry, I didn't realize I had all the volumes up so loud. It gives people a sense of what your set is like. It's also added value for clients. So a lot of professional clients now want stills and video, and it's important if you want to shoot professionally, or if you do, to understand video enough that even if you don't shoot the video, if you're not creating video on your set, you understand it enough to hire someone to do it. And then, of course, social media and self-promotion. It's just fun to do things to promote yourself, either yourself or your client. All right, so those are some reasons to shoot video. There's, of course, a million reasons. There's as many reasons to create anything as there are people. Some types of video, just standard video. There's cinemagraphs, and there's time lapse. Those are the sort of three categories I would put it in. So standard video. Is what we think of. This was something I did in the desert with a photographer, a friend of mine, several years ago. Things moving, you capture it, you put it together, it's a video. That's standard video. Pretty straightforward. Cinemagraphs are stills and video together. So a cinemagraph is something like this, where you take a video frame, you freeze that, but you put a part of it, you sort of cut a hole in part of it, and that part is moving. So it feels like a still photo with an element of movement. Several years ago, cinemagraphs were all the rage. That sort of faded. I still think they're cool, and I think it's worth looking at. It's a fun way to get started. It's also, if you're going to do cinemagraphs, think about things. So this is cinematograph. You can see the waterfall moving there on the right. Sound, which we're only going to talk about a little, is an important element of everything, including cinemagraphs. So if you look at this one, adding the sound makes it a lot more interesting to me. Sound design and sound quality is a really, really important thing in video. And it's one of the things that I have screwed up a lot when I was starting. I made a lot of mistakes. In a perfect world, you bring a sound guy, or a sound woman. So sound is important. Make sure you pay attention to it. If you want to do cinemagraphs, because we're only going to talk about it a little, you can make them in Photoshop. Photoshop can edit video. I use an app called Easy Cinemagraph. I have no relationship with them. It's just what I use. It's worth looking at. And then you have time lapse. Time lapse is a whole bunch of still photos put together. Although technically all video is a whole bunch of still photos put together, because that's what it is. Motion picture film is picture, 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 just run together so it looks like it. Video is the same. Time lapse is the same, but sort of captured in a different way. It's usually a long duration, a long period of time. This is the view from office I used to be in Manhattan. And as an example of you just never know, although it didn't work out, I had a production company reach out to me because they were interested in using that in a feature film. Then they ended up not wanting to buy it. But you just never know. Even if you're not a professional, if you create stuff and put it out there, somebody may reach out. Don't let them have it for free. You can think about it, but if they have money, you should get some too. All right, and next week or in 3 weeks, we're going to talk a lot more about time lapse. All right, so then moving on, we talked about gear a little. Here's more gear to think about. Obviously, if you have a camera and nothing else, you can create video. If all you have is your phone, like my Xperia 5 Mark II, you can create video. You don't need anything else, but the quality of your video will improve with other things. So whether it's a little camera and something like the Pixie here, the 3-way live advanced tripod I mentioned before, which the reason it's this is because it has a video head. The video head, you can see that the pan tilt is very long. It also has a very smooth pan. So when you pan, it's better quality. I'll show an example. You can buy much nicer tripod heads. The Nitro Tech is a really, really great video head. The 502AH, I don't have the Nitro Tech. I do have this great video head, but it might be more than you need. The The advanced and three-way advanced, if you have a small camera or a phone, it's probably all you need. You don't necessarily need to spend $200 or $500 on just a head. So this is a pan I made the other day. Panning is just when you go like this. With the Be-Free three-way advanced. So you can see that's pretty smooth. This is the same pan with just a ball head on the tripod. So you can see it's kind of smooth, but a little jerky. Like I was trying to make it smooth and it's fairly smooth, but it's not as smooth as a video head. If you are going to be doing movements, a video head will really make a difference. And if you already have a tripod, you can buy a video head and just put it on your tripod. Then you have things for motion control, and we're going to talk a lot more about this in the next one, like the Syrup Genie 1 or the Syrup Genie 2, which are devices that allow you to have repeatable and consistent movement. So this is the same as panning again with a Genie Mini 2. And it pans at a consistent speed. I can tell it how fast to go. I can tell it how far to pan. It allows me to get repeatable results that are very consistent. With this Syrup Genie Mini 2 and the Syrup Genie 1, it has an app for your phone. You can tell it what you want to do. And again, we'll talk a lot more about this in a couple of weeks. You can tell it to do video. You can tell it you want it to be fast or long or slow. You can tell it how wide of a range to go and how long to record for. They're really, really, really cool. The gimbals we mentioned, if you don't need the 460, maybe you need the 220. The 460 holds more weight. It's about 10 pounds. The 220 holds about 4.5 pounds. But because it holds less, it's lighter and less expensive. There's also the gimbal remote control, which will allow you to tilt the head remotely. And it also adds another handle so that you can get more stability. And with the gimbals, you can tell it, you can lock it this way or this way. You've got a lot of control for when you're moving. But this is why you use a gimbal. So this is with the gimbal 460 and my Sony a7R4, just walking. So you can see there's a little bit of movement, especially back and forth because I'm rotating, but it's pretty level. If you try and walk just holding a camera, it's going to jump like crazy. And that is another mistake I made early on in video. On that desert video I showed, when we were doing that, the first day I did almost all the video handheld because we were running around like crazy. And like 80% of it was unusable because there's just too much camera shake. And you can correct some of that in post, but it's better to get it right in camera. And depending on how stable you are, it might be better, but stability is important. Put it on a good tripod, use a gimbal. It will make your life better. You're less likely to have regrets. And then, especially something like this is me running with the gimbal. Like it moves around a little, but that's pretty good. That's pretty smooth. And then if you want to, you can attach the Manfrotto Gimboom, which is a carbon fiber rod that gets quite long, and you can get jib shots, which are the things where you see the camera, it's like a crane, go from low to high or high to low. You might consider controlling your light with a reflector, like the halo. Battery chargers. One thing I really like about the Pro Cube is that it also charges AA's, and if you have the Sony one, it's got inserts that you can do Z batteries, X batteries, or W batteries. GorillaPod we talked about. Video, very, 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 very important that your camera be clean, that your sensor and your lens be clean. Unlike with stills, where you can just go in because you picked one picture and clean it up. With video, if you have to clean up dust, it's really a pain. I've had to do that where I changed the lens and I didn't notice that there was a speck of dust on the sensor. And the only way I could find to do it where it worked well, there's lots of ways to do it with After Effects and Premiere and different things. I didn't like any of them. None of them worked well. I had to go into Photoshop and clean it up frame by frame. You don't want to do that. Keep your lens clean, keep your sensor clean. All right, let's talk about A-roll and B-roll. So A-roll is your primary footage. Maybe you're doing a
Hi there,
tutorial.
I'm Tony Gale, and today I'm going to show you how to customize.
Oh, I'm not, that's your primary footage. If you're doing a tutorial, it's you. If you're filming an event, maybe it's the speaker or the bride and the groom. If you're filming your kid's soccer game, it's your kid. That's the A-roll. That's the important footage that you focus on. But then you need B-roll, and B-roll is the secondary footage. It's all of the little insert shots that help you with editing, that make things more interesting. Like, nobody wants to watch 20 minutes of a person talking with no cuts. It's boring. Even if you watch like a TED Talk, they cut between cameras to make it interesting. And if you're only going to do A-roll, at least set up 2 cameras. It will make your editing much easier, so you can edit, cut. If somebody needs to redo a line or you want to cut something out, if you have 2 cameras, it makes it much easier. But if you have B-roll, that also solves that problem. So B-roll is just secondary footage that's not whatever your main subject is. It's just stuff that either helps tell the story or helps show detail or just looks cool and makes things visually better. With B-roll in particular, but with all video, you want to roll long and edit short. Always roll long and edit short. I've done plenty of clips where when I'm trying to edit later, I'm kicking myself because I didn't have enough at the beginning and enough at the end. So let's say you want to record your child practicing their lines for the play. So you start recording, give it a beat, give it a couple of seconds before they start speaking, record that, and then let it record a couple seconds after they're done speaking. What you don't want to do is hit record, go, because it really makes it difficult to edit. It just feels crowded. Things are too close. Roll long and then edit short. So with B-roll, this is stuff out in Prospect Park mostly. You can see all of these are about a second and a half. But those were all from much longer clips, and I'll demonstrate that in a second. This is the same clips, but twice as long. And you can feel, it just feels long. It feels like it's holding on things too much for the most part. Cut it short. You don't need as much as you think you need. You can always cut down. If you don't need it, cut it down. It's a lot more interesting, unless you're amazing. There are movies like Koyaanisqatsi, Pauskatsi, Baraka that do long, like 15, 20-second shots of beautiful things, and that can be done. But for the most part, roll long, edit short. And to give you a sense of it, so that turtle moving his head in Prospect Park last summer, you can see on the left is that clip. And I don't know if you can see, there's the little gray thing in the timeline. That was about 1 minute and 30 seconds that I kept it on the turtle. And I used about 2 seconds. Because you don't know what you're going to need. You don't know what you're going to use. Roll long. Hard drives are cheap. Cards are cheap. Let it roll. Cut down later. All right. Let's talk about some video settings, because you want to start video. Obviously, to get started, you can just put a card in your camera or just go to your phone, hit the red record button, you're recording video, done. Just like you want to take a picture, if you hit the shutter, you took a picture. But there are ways to get better pictures or to understand the settings and have more control. One of the things that people talk about a lot is frame rate. So frame rate is how many individual images there are per second. Motion picture film traditionally has been 24 frames a second. Actually, I think it's 23.997, but everybody just says 24. So each second of Star Wars that you watch is 24 individual frames that are just shown in sequence. That's why it feels like motion. Video in the past, like the video on TV, news, typically in the past has been 30p. And these are, by the way, for the United States. If you're in Europe, it's 25p, and I don't remember what the other one is. It's not the same. And PAL is a different standard than NTSC, which is what we use. So 24p, 30p, those are standard motion picture video. 60p is something that's being used more, or 48p. Like The Hobbit was filmed in 48p. Some people didn't like it because it felt more real, because there's just more information. There's 60p, 240, and on and on. Most cameras are going to do 24 and 30. Some will do 60, some will do 120, some will do 240, and sometimes lower, and we'll talk about that too. Often people are trying to figure out what's the right answer. There is no right answer. It depends on how you like to edit and what you like to capture. There are people that swear by 24p. There are people that swear by 30p. There are people that swear by 60p because it lets them get a little bit of slow motion if they need to. I primarily use 24p. I like the look of it because it reminds me of motion picture films. I think it's more interesting, but there's no right or wrong answer. If you're not sure, 24 or 30 is not going to be wrong. There are reasons for 60, but if you're going to do that, make sure you know why, especially because you're going to be using a lot more card space and hard drive space. And then if you have slow and quick on your camera, we'll get to that in a bit, you can actually go lower. So to give you a sense of what different frame rates feel like, played back at 24 frames a second, 1 frame a second, 4 frames a second, 15, 24, 60, 120, 240. If you think about it, 240 is 10 times slower than 24. 480. And then 960. 4 cameras that will do 480 and 960, like you can see on this, the resolution goes down. Things like the RX106 can do those high frame rates, but at a lower resolution. So also keep in mind, there's 2 different frame rates. There's your capture rate and there's your playback rate. So all of these were captured at whatever rate it says here, and then played back at 24 frames a second, because that's typically what you would do. But slow motion above 24 or 30, fast motion below. And then there are things like this. This is slow motion 120 with a gimbal walking through the redwoods. Slow motion can be very, very cool. It can also be overused. And then there's things like fast motion, also with a gimbal. If you're going to walk around and try and do fast motion like this, you really, really, really want a gimbal, because it's going to help minimize the jitteriness. In Return of the Jedi, when they were doing the speeder bike scenes, that was done with a Steadicam, which is this big rig that you really have to be an expert to use, and they're quite expensive. Gimbals didn't exist at that point. We are, for many, many reasons, really fortunate to be creating now in this time. The cameras are so good. I mean, the fact that there's cameras that will do 4K 120, I have cameras that will do 4K 120. That's incredible. Just the fact that we can capture 4K. My phone will do 4K 120. It's amazing what we can do. Gimbals haven't been around that long, but they are amazing. The way that we can steady footage like that and not need a Steadicam operator and a Steadicam. We are really, really fortunate to be able to do so many cool things with what's available. All right, so that's frame rate. Hopefully that was clear. If you're not sure, 24 or 30. And then we have settings like 4K, 1080, 720, 420. That should actually be 480. That is how big, how much information you're capturing. Depending on your camera and your phone, those settings are going to be in different places. But you can look, find what your camera will do, 4K, HD, 2 different HD settings, record settings. If your phone or camera gives you different record settings like this is with the R4, 30p, 24p, 160. The 100 is how much information per second it's recording, and you generally want more. So it's going to be better quality video if you do 24p 100 as opposed to 24p 60. Just like if you save a JPEG at quality level 12, it's a better quality JPEG than, say, quality level 9. The more information you have, the better the quality. And then you can set your record settings, 60p, 30p, 24p, 120p, whatever you have. And then if your camera has slow and quick, your phone probably won't. You're going to tell it what the playback speed is. So on that frame rate demo, everything was played back at 24, but captured at different things. Tell it 24, 30, 60, and then you can set it 1, 4, 8, what have you. If you're on a phone, depending on what phone you have, my Xperia, I've got the Cinema Pro app. I can change the FPS if you look there on the upper right. If you have an Android phone, which I do, your camera settings are going to be in the gear. You can see the gear in the upper left. You can change full HD, 4K, square, depending on what flavor of Android you're running and what phone you have. That's where those settings will be. If you're on an iPhone, they're there somewhere. I don't use an iPhone, so I can't speak to that. But what does all that mean? We all know 4K is bigger than 1080, than HD, right? We know 8K is bigger than that. And there are now cameras that will shoot 8K, which is amazing. To give you a sense of it, that little tiny square in the upper left, that's the TV you grew up with. Typically around 858 pixels by 480 pixels. That big, heavy TV that was in the living room when you were growing up, actually, unless if you're 18 now, maybe not when you were growing up. But for the rest of us, that's what we had. 480 by 858, tiny. Low resolution, but huge expensive TVs. Then we had HD that was 1280 by 720 pixels. You can see it's about 4 times the size of standard definition. And then HD, standard HD, which is 1920 by 1080. Your computer's probably that. Your TV might be that. That was when things really started taking a jump. And then 4K, most TVs are 4K these days. It's not 8840. It's that's incorrect. It's 3840 or a little bigger. I'm gonna have to fix that by 2160. So 4K is 4 times the size of HD. It's twice the height and twice the width. So 4 times the size. And then 8K is again 4 times the size of 4K, twice the height, twice the width. A lot more information. If you can capture in a larger resolution, even if you're going to deliver, even if what you're going to create is HD, for example, but you can capture in 4K, if you do that, it allows you to, in editing, you can pan or change or zoom or correct things in a way that you can't do if you're capturing in HD and editing in HD. And then there's things like MP4, AVC HD, XAVC HD, Move. That's all going to depend on your camera, and it's just the wrapper that the video is recorded in. You're not probably going to have a lot of options. It's going to be whatever your device does. But you want it to be the highest quality, and again, whatever will record with the most data is the best quality. And even if it's recorded in, say, XAVC HD, it's still probably going to say .mp4. Then you have things like do you capture in log or normal or cinetone? If you just open your camera or your phone and you hit record, that's just normal. Your phone or your camera is going to let you do things like capture in black and white or change the settings. Be cautious with that because it's the same thing as doing that on a JPEG. Once it's in there, it's baked in, it's hard to correct. There are some cameras that will record in RAW, but that's really hard to edit. You have something like log, S-Log, or every camera manufacturer has a log, I think. Log is a flatter profile that gives you more information. So you have more highlights, more shadows. It's more work on the back end. Cinetone is sort of a compromise between the two. It has a little more information, but is less work on the back end. To give you a sense, so this is captured in log, ungraded. You can see it's flat. Everything's sort of muddy and gray. And then in a second, it will be graded. I'm just going to skip ahead. So, log, graded log. You can see the contrast went up, the colors are punchier. It allows you to get more information, but it's more work because you're not going to just use log footage ungraded. All right, so there's all that. Those are the settings before you start hitting record. Now that you're gonna hit record, think about your shutter speed. On video cameras, it would be shutter angle. Your shutter speed generally should be 2 times your frame rate. So if you're capturing in 24p, your shutter speed should be 1/48th, except your camera won't do 1/48th, so 1/50th. If you're capturing in 30p, it should be 1/60th. That will give you the smoothest sort of what we think of as the video look. It allows for a little bit of blur, so it helps the frames blend together. If you do something else, so this is 24p at 1/50th of a second. That's what we're used to. Obviously recorded a while ago when people weren't wearing masks. That just feels normal to us. It certainly feels normal to me. Then we have 24p. At 1/50th, at 1/25th, you can see it's more blurry. There's more blur in the people. Now 100th, you can see it's just a little choppy. It doesn't feel quite as smooth. 200th, it feels very choppy. 400th, more choppy still. Like you can see, it feels like individual frames put together. 1/80th, even more so. That's why we have the rule of double the frame rate. Because if you go too fast, things are too jumpy. If you go too slow, things are too blurry. There are some exceptions to that, and there are people who ignore that entirely. There is software, I've never used it, that will help correct for that. And if you're someone who wants to capture video and then do frame grabs where you take individual frames as still photos, you're probably not going to want to capture at a 50th of a second because you're not going to want that blur for those still images. So it depends on what your use case is. But if you're capturing video, to capture video, double your frame rate. All right. Then we have white balance. Always, unless you can't for some reason, always do a custom white balance or a specific setting. Cloudy, sunny, shade, whatever it is. Don't use auto white balance with video, and this is why. So this is some drone footage I captured near where I grew up. You can see color's good, color's good, color's good. Everything looks nice, lots of trees, Washington's beautiful. And then it changes. And now everything changed because it moved from daylight to sunny. So it's changing the white balance automatically, but it ruins the clip. If I wanted that whole clip, it would be really, really difficult to correct because it changed partway through. It looks terrible. That's why you don't want to use auto white balance. If you do, you're going to end up with situations like that, even where things just change in front of you. If, let's say you're shooting some video at the airport, you've got a bunch of flight attendants in red, they leave, and then a bunch of flight attendants in blue come, your camera's probably going to shift the white balance, and you're going to see it. So stick with whatever white balance you want. Custom is usually the best option, but pick a white balance and stick with it. And then you may be thinking, if my shutter speed is locked, I can control my exposure with ISO and with aperture. Some people will use auto ISO for that reason, because if you're using a specific aperture, because that's what you want, let's say you want shallow depth of field, you're at a 50th of a second, you're shooting at 2.8, that's what you want. So the only thing you can do to adjust for that is your ISO. If what you're doing is moving around, let's say I'm following a person through their house. So the kitchen's bright, then they're in the hallway, it's darker, then the living room's bright. I can either lock an exposure so that when you go into the darker places, it looks darker, or I could put on an auto ISO so that when it gets darker, the ISO cranks up to compensate, then it cranks back down. There isn't really a right or wrong answer. Generally, I would prefer not to use auto ISO. And then, but you can, and there are reasons to do it. Maybe you want to do a shot going from inside the house to outside. If you do that, if you follow with that, the exposure is going to have to change. And again, if you want to have a consistent depth of field, which I would recommend because that is distracting, if your depth of field is going from shallow to deep as the light changes, that's going to be distracting. People are going to see that. That's where auto ISO might work. And then, of course, another way you can control your exposure is neutral density filters. Because your shutter speed is locked, because you may want a specific aperture, the ISO may not allow for that. If you want to shoot video in full sun, for example, there's the Sony 16 rule, f16, 1/25th of a second, ISO 100 in full sun. Maybe your camera goes down to 50, so now you're at f11, 1/25th of a second, but you want to be at a 50th, so now you're at like 16 1/3, and you don't want that. The easiest way to fix that is to put neutral density filters on your lens and bring it down. When I'm capturing video, I always bring a set of neutral density filters. You can get normal ones, you can get variable NDs. I prefer the fixed ones because the variable NDs can do some weird stuff. And you may wonder if you could use a polarizer instead. You can, but polarizers can change their effect as you change your direction. Like if you're looking at the sky pointed here and then pointed there, the deepness of the blue can shift because of the direction, the polarization of the light. So you may not want to use a polarizer. I don't for these things. Manual exposure versus auto, we talked about that. Manual focus versus autofocus. There are adherents of both. The newer cameras are amazing with autofocus. The eye autofocus on mine is incredible. I will usually do autofocus when I'm capturing video, but there are times when you want to do manual focus. There are things like with the gimbal, the Manfrotto Gimbal 460, you can get an attachment to it that will allow you to do a follow focus, which is you let someone have a little dial and they can adjust the focus with a video feed off the camera as someone else is walking around. If you're on a big budget TV or movie, they're using a focus puller to do that. If it's just you, it just depends on what you want. If you're shooting shallow, autofocus is probably the right answer because you can set it, think everything's good. If you're filming yourself, for example, then you step in and you're 2 inches off and now everything's out of focus. But it just depends. There are just as many people that swear by autofocus as people that swear by manual focus. It's one of those things, it's like back button autofocus on your camera. The people that swear by back button autofocus don't understand why anyone would do it any other way. The people that prefer the shutter autofocus prefer that. Try it and see what you think. All right, and then I mentioned I've screwed up sound plenty of times. If you're going to capture video, sound is important. So think about the sound. Your camera and your phone have a built-in mic. It's always there, which is good. It's typically not a great mic, both because it's built in and there's just a limit to what they can do, but also unless you are right on top of your camera, you have the distance problem. Like the camera that's pointed at me right now is about 6 feet away. If I was using that mic, I'm too far away to get good quality audio. But if it's all you've got, then that's all you've got. One option is a shotgun mic. Directional, better quality. It can be limited by camera placement if it's mounted to the camera, but it's still going to be better than the built-in one. A wired lav mic is the little tiny lapel mic wired directly to your camera, your recorder. You are limited by the length of that cable. I have one that's about 30 feet. Whoops. And then you have wireless lav mics, which are not required to be physically attached to the camera. They can pick up interference. You want to be careful with that. Make sure you get a high quality one. And then there's external recorders. Oh, and I skipped that. There's boom mics, which are basically a shotgun on a boom where someone, either a device like a C-stand, has it right over the top of your subject, or someone is holding it on a boom. And then there's external recorders. They're less prone to distortion interference, but you'll have to sync later. And that's where the built-in audio from your camera is useful, because it makes it easy to sync. Any of the good video editors now will do that automatically. You just tell it to. And as an example of the difference in sound,
shoot adventure
so this is
sports
a
and
lav
outdoor
built in.
lifestyle in the outdoor industry, and live in Washington
This is
State
Gabe Rogel,
and Bellingham,
super nice guy, great
beautiful part of our
photographer.
country.
Let me see.
Casing the need,
And then this is
having our public lands and these open spaces to get out and kind of deep.
And then that second bit was the on-camera mic. You can hear it picked up a lot more information around. The audio quality wasn't as good. It wasn't as focused. That's the difference. And then your camera or your phone may have features like zebras, which help you see what your exposure is. You can usually set your zebras to either tell you medium exposure, middle gray, or overexposed. And then focus peaking to help you focus. With zebras and focus peaking, even though you see it on the camera screen, the feed, the recorded video feed, those won't show up. There's also, depending on what you have, there's things like false color and other things like that. Those typically don't show up until you're at professional level video cameras. And then we talked about sound. And if you want to use sound, you should. It's important as image creators or video creators, we want people to respect our work. It's important that we respect the work of other people. Don't just use music that you love that you've downloaded. Don't do that. You are limited by what you have available. You can't just use other people's work. Just like someone can't just take your picture and put it in an ad, or even take that picture and just hang it in their living room without getting your permission. The same thing. We can't just take other people's songs and use them without permission. There are subscription services like Artlist and Epidemic, Pond5, where you can pay a subscription fee. I use Artlist, but I have no relationship with them. I pay an annual fee and I can download music and use it commercially in my videos. If you don't want to pay that fee, and I understand you may not want to, you're just doing it for fun, there are places like the Free Music Archive where you can get Creative Commons music, which you have to look at what the Creative Commons license is for that particular track, but that will typically let you use music for free. Sometimes you'll have to put something giving that musician credit. But there are lots of options of low cost and free music. It may not be the one you want. If you want a Drake track, you're going to have to pay a lot of money for that. But if you just want something cool, wade through a bunch of stuff and you'll find it. If you pay for a subscription, in general, the quality of the music is higher than the stuff that's available for free, but it's out there. There's also, like, the artist Moby has a website called Moby Gratis, Gratis, where he has certain tracks available for free for non-commercial products. So you could probably, I did email them once to get clarification and they didn't get back to me. If you were filming your child's soccer game, your son or daughter's soccer game, and you wanted to put some music on it just so that you could watch it at home, I would think that was non-commercial and you could get that cool Moby track. So there are lots of options, but just be aware of it. You don't want someone else to steal your stuff. Don't steal somebody else's stuff. And it doesn't matter that you're not making money from it, that it's not commercial. You're still not supposed to do it. All right. And then a few other things to think about. Composition. So the typical 35mm based camera is 3x2. That's when we're looking through our camera, 3x2 is what we're looking at. It's not quite a square, but it's square-ish. It's rectangular, but not crazy rectangular. Your standard TV, 1920 by 1080, 3840 by 2160. True 4K is 4096 by 2160. That's 16 by 9. That's what we think of for a TV. Most motion pictures these days are shot at 235:1, which I believe is instead of 16:9, it's 21:9. But there's a huge range. There's a lot more. So think about what that is, because that gives you a lot of creativity. As an example, the surfer I photographed out in Morro Bay in California. Upper left, 3:2, that's the full frame. 16 by 9, upper right, that's what your TV would show, so that we lost a little top and bottom. 235:1, lower left, we lost a lot top and bottom, but when you look at that, that feels like what I think of as a movie. That feels cinematic, that very long panoramic. And then the old school TVs, the standard definition 4:3 on the lower right. Think about what that aspect ratio is. Think about what you want to do. And when you're creating your video, think about it. Your camera by default is going to do, almost certainly is going to do 16 by 9. Your phone is almost certainly going to do 16 by 9. If you want something more cinematic, you have to think about that. You might consider getting some acetate and putting it over your screen so that you can keep that in mind. But you can control that. You can do all of that in editing. And then some of the things that are similar with stills and video, because again, video is a bunch of stills put together. Composition, exposure, framing, light, all of those. If you are used to taking pictures and you're intimidated by video, think about the fact that composition is composition. Good composition is still good composition, whether or not something's moving. Good exposure is still good exposure. If you can get a good exposure in stills, you can get a good exposure in video. Your framing, maybe there's foreground elements, background elements, and then your light. Always look for good light. All of those, if you can do them well in stills, you can do them well in video. And then after all that, you want to start video, you're not sure what to do. A few years ago, for a year, every day, I photographed 5 seconds of footage. Every day for a year, I photographed 5 seconds of footage, at least, and then put them together in clips by the month. If you're not sure what to do, that was Brian Smith, it's a good way to start. Just set yourself a goal to make some video every day. You don't need to have a goal with what to do with it. Just get out there, make some video. After you've done it for a month or 2 months, start putting it together and see what you get. But it's, with video in particular, one of the challenges I have always had is trying to come up with what's the cool idea to make a video. If I want to take pictures, I'll just get a camera and walk around and that looks cool, I'll take some pictures. With video, because there's so much more involved, it's easier for me at least to get hung up and to just not even start because I'm not sure what I want to do. But the answer is just to get out there and do something. Even if it's not good, even if you end up not using it for anything, just get out there and start. And then you started, you're not sure what to do. Just a quick overview on some of the non-linear editors. Every software is probably non-linear at this point. Linear editors were what they used to use, where the film would roll through and you'd cut and cut, tape it together. iMovie, it's free, but it's Mac only. Windows Movie Maker, free, Windows only. DaVinci Resolve, a lot of people really like DaVinci Resolve. It has a free version and a paid version. The free version is excellent, available on Mac and PC. Adobe Premiere, not free, Mac and PC. Adobe Premiere is what I use. Adobe Rush is another Adobe product. They say it's free. It's not really, it's free, but you can only output 3 things. But Rush is cool because you can put it on your phone and on your computer. Mac and PC, Final Cut 10, Final Cut X, Mac only. Avid, crazy, complicated. I tried to figure it out once and gave up. But a lot of professional editors, a lot of films are edited on Avid, also available on Mac and PC. And then some resources, because I went quick and there's a lot. There's a website called No Film School, excellent. Artlist, Premium Beat for music. Alpha Universe has a bunch of stuff. Sony Cine. On YouTube, Manfrotto Imagine More. Manfrotto has a YouTube channel with a lot of useful information. Syrup, the Syrup Genie Mini 2, they've got a lot of useful information. Curtis Judd, Alex Knickerbocker, Gerald Undone, Indie Mogul. There's a lot of stuff out there. These are some of the places I go, either because I can't figure out how to do something or just to see what I don't know, which is a lot. There's so much to know out there. All right. Any questions?
Excellent. Tony, first of all, thank you very much for giving us that ton of information there. So really appreciate everything you dove into. I know that it's a lot to cover, so challenging, but thank you nonetheless. We'll start it off with a gear question, because that's always what we love to talk about here, right, Tony? Gear.
I am a gear nerd.
Right. So Malcolm's joining us and was interested. He's using a D850 currently and was interested in your opinion, clearly, which head would be better, the Manfrotto 502AH or the Pro 055?
So the Pro 055 is a excellent stills head, and I have that head. But if you want to go with video, I would go with the other one.
Go with the 502AH.
Yeah, the 502AH. I will say, I've said before, just the way things are named in the photo industry drives me nuts.
It definitely gets confusing sometimes.
Yeah. But for video, I would go with the 502AH.
Awesome. And Hayden's joining us from Facebook. Thank you for joining us, Hayden. Personally, what rate is best for social media in terms of frame rate? When does it start to get blurry or pixelated?
So this is something where this is going to be dangerous because I could be very wrong. I don't think the frame rate is so much the issue as the resolution. And some things, like Facebook is notorious for compressing things. Like everybody, Facebook, YouTube, you upload a video and they compress it because it's on their server and they want it to take up as little space as possible. So it is compressed. So think about that. I would upload it whatever frame rate you want to capture in, that artistically, that's the right frame rate to capture in. And then the bigger issue is what aspect ratio and what size to upload. And again, with the caveat that I am not at all confident in this, I would upload the highest quality possible, and then so that when it's compressed, it's still as good as possible. But I'm not confident in that answer.
Excellent, excellent. And I definitely could say, speaking from personal experience, working on some projects with some buddies of mine, like you said, each company has its own complications and, stipulations. You go from Instagram to TikTok to, YouTube, and you literally fall in a rabbit hole where you're editing all day long to, fit the various formats, and you almost need a cheat sheet. Malcolm actually clarified. He wanted to know the Manfrotto 502AH or the Pro 500. My apologies on that.
The Pro 500. I'm not sure then. With the Pro 500, hold on. I'm looking right now.
Yeah, no problem. We're working on it, Malcolm. We're going to get you an answer on that. Sorry about that.
And if I don't come up with an answer quickly enough, just email me and I'll get back to you. And if I don't, just email me again.
just email until you finally do get an answer.
Well, sometimes I think either one is fine, actually.
So it's just a personal preference thing.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well,
but double check. When you look at the head, it will give you a weight limit. I believe both of them will be fine. Just check and make sure that weight limit is well above whatever your camera is.
Yeah, I was gonna allude to that also. Lens type. What kind of lens you're shooting with and everything like that. That's definitely gonna make a difference as well. So definitely a good rule of thumb. Make sure.
Yeah, whatever the biggest lens you think you're gonna put on there, however much that weighs, plus your camera, plus a little.
Plus maybe 5 or 10 more pounds, just in case.
Make sure it can hold like 200 pounds. You'll be fine.
Future proofing, you know?
Yeah, you won't be able to move it, but
you know, no problem. Well, Tony, thank you so much for joining us again. Really appreciate it. I want to thank Vitech Imaging Solution again for sponsoring this event. Thanks everybody for tuning in to another rendition of the B&H Virtual Event Space. We'll see you all next time.
thanks everybody.